Welcome to the Reality Taboo, where no topic is off limits. It's August 3rd, 2024, and today we'll be talking about the destruction of innocence and how they are, in their own words, coming for your children, as the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus famously or infamously put it. Innocence is something that the left generally despises, even down to the terminology they use to self-describe. Now, it's become, in the intervening 5 or 6 years, a term of derision, but initially woke was a descriptor that the left used to positively describe those who had become enlightened, who had had the scales fall from their eyes, and who had allegedly seen the world as it truly was. It was a term that within the left's lexicon meant roughly what red pill does on the right side of the political spectrum, especially as it developed in the mid-teens and late teens. And what does woke evoke? It evokes waking up from a dream, and there really is nothing that's more blissful or innocent than a dream. Bound up in the hostility towards innocence is a presumption that innocence is synonymous with ignorance. As we'll get into today, that couldn't be any further from the truth when it comes to empirical reality, because that is something that the reigning orthodoxy has no time for whatsoever, and nowhere is it more blatant and clear for all to see than in the world of human biodiversity, specifically as it regards differences in men and women, sexual differences. And we'll get to that, but before we do, we'll look at another issue that is even more explicitly aimed at destroying innocence. And that comes by way of polling from economist YouGov that conducted a survey this week asking respondents if they support or oppose, quote, requiring K through 12 schools to inform parents if their child requests to go by different pronouns while at school. And while by a nearly 2-to-1 margin, 54% to 30%, the general public supported schools being mandated to tell parents if their children embrace a break from reality and slip into mental illness or begin to slide into mental illness, by a modest margin among intended Harris voters, with 38% saying that they supported such a requirement, while 41%, so a plurality, were in opposition. And in all these cases, the residuals are those who responded with a, quote, not sure, unquote, answer. This really extends beyond just a destruction of innocence for the obvious reasons. It's also destructive of innocence in a less figurative, directly literal way. We know that those who experience transgender issues have questions about their own sexual or gender identities tend to be at exceptionally elevated risks of self-harm, suicide, and other depressive behaviors and pathologies. And yet here we have the left supporting, hiding those issues, hiding all of the corresponding negative outcomes that are associated with those issues by extension from parents. And there's a straight through line to this at the prepubescent and adolescent time frames in development, and what occurred on the Olympic stage when a South Park parody became manifest in reality on 2 separate occasions in boxing, where biological men obliterated, physically pummeled biological women in matches that lasted just a matter of seconds.
A beautiful day in Morrison, Colorado, as we get ready for the 6th annual Strong Woman Competition, a 2-day-long competition of tests built to push athletes to their very limits. Joining me now is the current champion of the Strong Woman Competition, Strong Woman. Miss Woman, do you feel ready?
Oh yeah, I'm ready, David. There are just so many amazing women athletes out here today. It makes me so proud.
Now, this is the first year that a trans woman is in the competition. How do you feel about that?
Amazing. I feel honored to be a part of history. I have a lot of incredible trans friends who are athletes, and so we're all inspired this woman's competing.
Uh-huh. And, have you actually ever met Heather Swanson?
No, I've never competed against her before, no.
She's not exactly your average trans athlete.
Well, what is an average trans athlete? Honestly, I find that kind of bigoted, David.
Okay. Heather Swanson is actually joining us now. Miss Swanson, how does it feel to be competing today?
I can't tell you how free I feel now that I've started identifying as a woman. Now that I can compete as female, I'm ready to smash the other girls.
And is it correct you just started identifying as female 2 weeks ago?
I'm not here to talk about my transition. I'm here to kick some fucking ass. Let me tell you something, Dingleberry.
David Perry.
I'm gonna roll up the other women here, and I'm gonna smoke them. I am the strongest woman this state has ever seen.
Any words for the challenger, Miss Woman?
Good luck, Heather.
Luck is for dudes.
Well, with that, let's get right to the action.
And in the subsequent minute that visualizes that competition taking place, one of the events that is included is a boxing match where Heather Swanson pounds a hapless female athlete, knocking her back several steps, and the camera pans out before he knocks her completely out of the ring. The bit's funny because of how absurd the premise is that females would compete with males in biological competitions, specifically competitions that involve upper body strength, but really any kind of physical competition whatsoever. It doesn't take a lot of perspicacity to make the whole concept risible on its face. I can recall in the early 90s a movie called The Ladybugs featured Rodney Dangerfield, who in this regard really didn't get the respect that he deserved, because he, or at least the movie he was in, could presage what was already happening in the culture and took it to its logical conclusion, and hilarity ensued. That was my reaction when I was in elementary school. I could see how ridiculous such a ludicrous idea was and what the consequences would be if it was ever treated seriously. A brief synopsis of the movie, it involves Rodney Dangerfield as a character who is coaching a soccer team that is sponsored by a company, the head of which is Rodney Dangerfield's employer, and the team had done well in the past, but they had lost some players, and to try to get in the good graces of his boss, Dangerfield decides to coach this girls' team, but the number of players he has that are returning, there's only one that has any talent at all, and he quickly realizes that it's a hopeless endeavor, and so he turns to his own personal life where he is engaged to someone who has a son from a previous marriage, and so Dangerfield convinces that son to dress in drag and go play soccer, and of course he dominates everyone on the team and single-handedly or single-footedly or double-footedly, I guess, as would be the case here, dominates. And the end of the movie has a little vignette where Dangerfield has taken over the softball team that the company also sponsors, and as the bus with the team is driving to the Diamond to play, before they get off the bus, Dangerfield tells all the boys who make up the entire team to put on their wigs so that they can go pretend to be women and dominate that sport just like they dominated in soccer. The physical differences are the easier ones to focus on, but they aren't the only ones that matter. There are also psychological differences that play into competitive contests of any kind. Notably, women tend to have higher verbal intelligence than men do on average, while men have higher visuospatial and mathematical intelligence. And yet, spelling bee champions are distributed almost perfectly evenly among boys and girls, even though spelling is a unique academic arena that women are better suited for and have an inherent advantage in, while men, or in this case boys, have an advantage in other scientific competitions, mathematical competitions, physical competitions, all the other competitive endeavors that the ages in adolescence and early teenagehood, when children compete in things like the spelling bee. Boys have a lot of other avenues that they can compete in. And so a lot of highly intelligent boys get pulled into other things and don't focus on spelling. And so there is a smaller pool of boys than there are girls in the first place to compete in spelling, and girls have a natural advantage in spelling due to their elevated average verbal intelligence, and yet still the results are split almost down the middle. Or actually, according to the Scripps Spelling Bee list of champions over the last century, they are split exactly evenly. So this is a situation that couldn't favor women any more than it does. It's non-physical, completely academic, where the differences are nowhere near what they are when it comes to tests of physical strength. And females are able to only muster a standstill with boys. And that's because the psychological drivers that underpin competitiveness, that trait of competitiveness, or that suite of traits that manifests itself as competitiveness, tends to be much higher in boys and men than it is in girls and women. And so it's why I, despite being able to see the obvious absurdity of putting men and women in an octagon to square off, when I could see how absurd and dangerous that is. At the same time, it's nice to have reality assert itself and to have women competing, engage in hyper-competitive activities where they effectively mimic men or attempt to mimic men. That is a sort of revolt against nature. And so there is a certain level of satisfaction, unpleasant as it is to witness in real time, to having this be the state of affairs on the most international of world stages. Women's sports shouldn't be viewed as a separate but equal version of men's sports. It should be more akin to how we view, say, recreational soccer league for people over the age of 40, or a recreational basketball league for people no taller than 5'6". Helen Lovejoy was an object of derision for her putatively histrionic refrain.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
But she's a modern-day Cassandra, depicted in the form of popular entertainment, but one who is uttering a rhetorical cry to a crumbling, dying civilization that didn't heed her concerns then and is even less likely to heed them now, because in an enlightened, hedonistic society that increasingly has no children of its own, the idea of thinking about the children, sacrificing immediate pleasures and immediate conveniences for the sake of a posterity that is only hypothetical and increasingly fantastical, given fertility rates across not just the Western world anymore, not just the developed world, really the entire globe, with the exception, and even that exception is becoming increasingly qualified, of sub-Saharan Africa, where fertility rates are have dropped below replacement in most of the world, and are in the process of dropping down below replacement in the rest of the world that's still holding out. The children are the future, as another old proverb used to say. Well, a lack of children augurs no future at all. Speaking of Harris supporters, the smart money currently perceive that she will be the 47th president. The momentary sense that Trump was going to win re-election following the assassination attempt, and the read of many dissidents that the fix was in because Trump was receiving some amount of elite pro-Israel elite support that he didn't receive, or did so to a much smaller extent and far less prominently in 2016 and in 2020 than he is in 2024, that the fix was somehow in for him to be the one that the deep state had made its peace with and was willing to bring in explicitly, so that the foreign policy aims of Israel could be realized without any obstruction, without the party in power in the United States being hindered from its political flank in the form of anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian demonstrations that have taken place on several college campuses and also in Washington, D.C., that increasingly seems to be perceived as rubbish. To me, it was always obvious that Israel has an outsized importance in the view of American elites specifically and the West more generally, but it is not the only thing that matters. It's not of absolute paramount importance. It's one concern of many, and the institutional power structures have plenty of ways to ensure that their will is realized in Israel and here in the United States without having to provide titular power to someone who they can't control, even if that someone increasingly mouths the platitudes and expresses the sentiments that the establishment prefers. That their weird lingo aside, remarkably, Trump appears to be one of the behaviorally least weird celebrities, people in power, elites in existence. The only dirt they have on him is him doing, and even that's sparse, few and far between, doing what red-blooded alpha men do and have always done. Despite his being one of the most surveilled and focused upon personages in all of human history, with unprecedented up to this point, the cutting edge of every aspect of the panopticon focused on him, they haven't been able to come up with any seriously compromising dirt on Trump. And so someone who cannot be destroyed that way is inherently going to be viewed as an unacceptably risky proposition. There really is no amount of signaling that he is on board with the establishment agenda that will be enough to convince the powers that be that he can be entirely trusted, because if he decides to step out of line, there is nothing other than soft influence that they can try to use to get him to course correct. Soft influence or bullets, poison, car accidents. There are brutal, if unsavory, tactics still open to the power structure if it chooses to use them, and I'm of the opinion that it will. And so while there is an elite counterinsurgency willing to take a chance on Trump with the America First, Israel as the 51st state compromise we've mentioned on previous podcasts, that is just an insurgency. It's not the main line. And as if to underscore that point for us, Trump this week mentioned that in an interview that he would support opening up the intelligence files on Jeffrey Epstein and the island and the list of people who took the plane ride and what it was that they received as a fringe benefit or set of fringe benefits along with that exclusive resort trip that they took. Compare Trump's normalcy, hyper-normalcy, to the manipulative gamma perversion of science fiction writer Neil Gaiman. I hope it's Gaiman. I'd not heard of this person prior to news of his alleged sexual abuse or serial engagement in sexual abuse over a several decades long career. But this person is a big name in science fiction, fantasy writing. He's been a bestseller for 40 years. He's been accused of getting into bathtubs with underage fans and with requiring that tenants on properties that he owns, when they fall under financial hardship, he's demanded or alleged to have demanded humiliating sexual favors in return for extending limited grace periods exploiting people in situations of the most disparate power imbalances imaginable, at least within the realm of science fiction and in the realm of tendency. That deviant weirdness stands in stark contrast to the personal behavior of Trump that has been attested to over decades, really over generations at this point, human generations, where he is a notoriously high tipper who learns the names of all the people who he interacts with on a daily basis, or even on a just semi-regular basis, who are in subservient roles to him. Virtually without exception, they remark upon how generous he is, how magnanimous he is with his attention and with his resources, famously giving out tips in the form of multiple $100 bills, getting to know their names, committing those names to memory, learning some basic biographical details about family members and about interests that they have. It's not the weirdness that they hate about Trump. It is, to the contrary, it's the normalcy, it's the accessibility and relatability that he effortlessly and organically exudes. That is another reason that they cannot stand him. And speaking of weird, to go on a bit of a digression, YouGov conducted a survey, as they often do. It's really, probably for my money, one of the best, if not the very best, polling organization in existence now is YouGov. And they had a timely poll, as they so often do, asking respondents whether or not they consider themselves to be weird. That question being made germane by the uniformity with which the corporate media and other stenographers of the state have made it their point of attack against Trump and the Trump campaign. From that survey, with a sample size over 3,500 American adults, among Democrats, 50% self-describe as weird. Among independents, 52% self-describe as weird, while among Republicans, it's only 38%. So Republicans, by a significant margin, are the least, quote, weird, unquote, of the three major political orientation strands in the United States. 50% of women compared to just 44% of men self-describe as weird, and by age, among those Zoomers, those under the age of 30, it is 56% who describe as weird. Among millennials, aged 30 to 44, it's 59%. Among Xers, just 44%, and boomers, only 31%. So all of the major demographic groups that make up the core constituencies of the Democrat Party are more likely to self-describe as weird and presumably have more affinity to the idea of weirdness. You can think of places like Austin, where it's Keep Austin Weird, that blue outpost in a sea of red. Weirdness is weak sauce as far as pejoratives go, as far as derogatory adjectives are concerned. But to the extent that it's an insult at all, it's an insult that is going to smart more when it is directed against those who are more likely to vote for Harris than among those who support Trump and J.D. Vance. But even if it doesn't correspond with reality, that isn't really the point. The purpose is a didactic one. It is to instruct those, or to sermonize to those status seekers that this is the thing that good people are saying now. Status is everything. Empirical argumentation is nothing. That's why real-world events don't move the needle one way or the other. As we talked about last week, the polling, or the week before, the polling results stay remarkably consistent in the face of current events that presumably would push in one direction or the other. There's not even the smallest movement to be detected right when it happens, and even if there were such a movement that usually can just be attributed to statistical noise, it's gone in the subsequent week. And it's because such a large segment of the population, the status conscious, status seeking segment of the population, which is a huge segment, it's the managerial class and those who aspire to be in the managerial class or to serve under them and to accrete some of the benefits by way of those benefits trickling down because they have the right lifestyles and the right opinions and the right takes and the right attitudes on things. And this especially applies to white people. As listening to some of the clips from the Zoom calls, Zoom sessions, whatever they were, the multiple speaker virtual events for white men who supported or who are supporting Harris, and also separately white women who are supporting Harris. What immediately becomes obvious if you listen to or listen for it is that everything in those calls or remarks, instructions that are being given by those who are featured on the calls or on the sessions, everything, without exception, points to status, to moral and virtue signaling. There are no empirical arguments being made. There are no explicit details about policy differences. It is all hand-waving in the direction of morality and status and right beliefs. Right, I should hasten to add, in the sense of being perceived to be correct, not politically right, because politically right is wrong, and not just incorrect, but morally wrong, while political leftism of the neoliberal variety is correct and commendable and, in fact, required for status to be maintained.
Kamala is just so certainly our girl, you know. I can see her being president. I'm so excited. A woman president, man. How exciting. I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
BIPOC women have tapped us in as white women to step up, listen, and get involved this election season. This is a really important time, and we all need to use our voices and influence for the greater good. No matter who you are all influencers in some way, because the toxic feels smaller when we support each other. But don't make it about yourself. As white women, we need to use our privilege to make positive changes. If you find yourself talking over or speaking for BIPOC individuals, or God forbid, correcting them, just take a beat, and instead we can put our listening ears on. So do learn from and amplify the voices of those who have been historically marginalized, and use the privilege you have in order to push for systemic change. As white people, we have a lot to learn and unlearn. So do check your blind spots.
No empirical arguments being made whatsoever, let alone anything compelling beyond direct appeals to status. You are a bad person if you don't fall in line here and hold the opinions that you're supposed to hold and have the enthusiasm that you're supposed to have. And why do you have to have that? Because people who are good have that, and people who are not good do not have it. So you need to have it, or else you are bad. That's it. That is the Harris campaign in a nutshell. That's a narrow iteration of the instructions in the context of retail politics, but it is a broader instruction manual for those who wish to succeed and to prosper and to move up through the ranks of the managerial class. As maddening as the current situation is, reality can only be temporarily stultified and suppressed. It will reassert itself when the illusions layered on top of it deviate so wildly and so violently from the underpinning foundational realities that the whole illusion vanishes, that the structure that lacks integrity, all structural integrity, collapses under its own weight. And with each passing day, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that we are not approaching that point rapidly. And so we'll end today with a reading of Rudyard Kipling's profound poem entitled The Gods of the Copybook Headings. We'll talk to you next week.
The Gods of the Copybook Headings by Rudyard Kipling. As I pass through my incarnations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall, and the gods of the copybook headings, I notice, outlast them all. We were living in trees when they met us. They showed us each in turn that water would certainly wet us, as fire would certainly burn. But we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind, so we left them to teach the gorillas, while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as the spirit listed. They never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor windborne, like the gods of the marketplace. But they always caught up with our progress, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field, or the lights had gone out in Rome. With the hopes that our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton. They denied she was even Dutch. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we worshipped the gods of the market, who promised these beautiful things. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore, if we gave them our weapons, that the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us, and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook headings said, "Stake to the devil, you know." On the first Fenian sandstones we were promised the fuller life, which started by loving our neighbour, and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children, and the men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook headings said, "The wages of sin is death." In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all, by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy, and the gods of the copybook headings said, "If you don't work, you die." Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew, and the hearts of the meanest were humbled, and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and two make four, and the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. As it will be in the future, as it was at the birth of man, there are only 4 things certain since social progress began: that the dog returns to his vomit, and the sow returns to her mire, and the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire, and that after this is accomplished and the brave new world begins, when all men are paid for existing, and no man must pay for his sins, as surely as water will wet us, as surely as fire will burn, the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return.